After years and years of protest, and backwards and forwards upon negotiations, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 finally put an end to the segregation for people of different skin colour, where black people would finally have the same opportunities as white folks, no longer being segregated, meaning they were no longer classed as second-class citizens. During Christmas of that year, Walt Disney released Mary Poppins, a film that was stuck within 20 years of negotiations, as Disney had to negotiate with Travers, who was the original book author of Mary Poppins, upon how Disney-fied Travers wanted her story to be. Disney had to meet halfway with Travers upon some certain aspects, but the film is largely Walt's own design, as in the original contract for both parties, Walt would get the final say. Along with Song of the South, this was one of the very few times that Walt Disney in his career had to challenge his own vision. But Mary Poppins would be his final major production, as Walt Disney would pass away 2 years later. Mary Poppins represent as to how much Walt was willing to sacrifice from his own branding and image that he built up for decades. That exact vision that he couldn't separate from Song of the South, that he refused to make complicated. Now the Disney Corporation, without its fearless leader, and in this new segregated world, could they still harness and maintain that Disney image moving forward? And could such a film as Song of the South still be appreciated? The Disney Corporation had an exclusive tradition where every decade the films would be exclusively re-released back into theatres upon their anniversary of release. This was at the time the only way to re-watch a Disney animated feature, with the exception of several edited down for TV. Song of the South was exempt for being reissued back in the 1960s, and for a short period of time it had been considered to permanently retire the feature, but through popular demand it had been decided to give Song of the South another go in 1972, marking it as 16 years since the film was last publicly available, with the conversation of the civil rights movement largely subsiding by this point, making the corporation feeling much more comfortable to unveil the feature. The film reissue was a success, making $7 million, making it the most successful Disney re-release up until that point. It had made more money than its last two releases, which together brought in about $5.4 million, and the critical response was far more positive than its original 1946 release. It appeared time was far more kinder to Song of the South. Despite the annual decade re-release, it was actually re-released the following year as a double feature alongside Aristocats, as part of the 50th anniversary of Walt Disney Productions, then being re-released in 1980 in time for the 100th anniversary of the original publications of the Uncle Remus tales, with the reissues doing far more better in box office numbers, being far more successful than the surrounding Disney features of that era, trying so desperately to break out of that Disney mold. Proceeding into the 80s, where the new Disney films were dwindling in popularity and the company's priority, with Disney during this time becoming far more well known for its other assets, such as the Disneyland parks, where its most luxurious film of the past decade was getting its own theme park ride. To spice the water for the public's interest, and just in time for its 40th anniversary, for the fourth time in 13 years, Song of the South was reissued yet again. But the reviews of this time round, while the animated segments were still appraised, the live-action portions on the other hand, were becoming very reminiscent of the critiques back from the 40s. It had been 22 years since of the civil rights movement, giving enough time for a generation of ethnic groups to create media productions that voice the concern of racial inequality, with projects such as the TV series Roots painted a picture of what the Deep South was truly like. The seemingly stereotyped images in the film could no longer be pardoned by the general public. The ride still went on ahead for construction, and while it was always intended for the ride to be mostly based on the animated portions, there were no references made of the live-action segments in the final ride. Splash Mountain was so popular it reappeared in several of the Disneyland theme parks. But little did anybody know at that point that the 1986 re-release of Song of the South would be marked as the final time the movie would ever be officially available in its own home native country. In the late 80s and the duration of the 90s, Disney would release the majority of their back catalogue to home media, finally breaking their annual tradition of only showing their films specifically to the movie theatres, occurring by decade for special occasions, with the notable exception of Song of the South, at least being pardoned in the US, as it was sold on home media and even appeared on television in certain areas of the world, with the formats mainly consisting of VHS and Betamax, notably being released on Laserdisc in Hong Kong and Japan in 1990, with countries such as Italy and the Netherlands residing as the final places that the film was officially released on home media, that being VHS in 1997. In 2006, the BBC broadcast Song of the South on UK television, thus marking it as the final time the film was officially shown anywhere. The following year, the CEO of Disney, Bob Iger, who had only been enrolled for the job for over a year, expressed an interest to release Song of the South. But in 2010, he said that there are no current plans to release the film, calling the film antiquated and fairly offensive. And usually the question is always popped up at every Disney shareholder meeting, usually responding feeling that the timing isn't quite right. Disney's creative director Dave Bottix, in a 2010 interview, gave a spark of optimism for the Disney fans, recognising the film's importance to the company's history, not knowing when, but did guarantee that one day they will do something about Song of the South. In 1999, Disney fan Chris Willis launched a fan-made Song of the South website, originally dedicated to his memorabilia, but it eventually grew into an information platform, mainly coming from the lack of information that was widely available about the movie, initially starting his website as a defender for the feature and a campaign to get the movie released, but gradually mellowing out over time. While still wanting to see the movie get its DVD release, he's revised a lot of his articles to be non-biased and more respectable towards different opinions, with a news article about any recent information and having a whole page correcting Wikipedia rumours. His website is perhaps the most comprehensible source of information about Song of the South. Floyd Norman was the first black Disney animator working at the studio during Walt Disney's lifetime, working on such classics such as Sleeping Beauty and The Jungle Book, then moving on to television and working on a number of Hanna-Barbera cartoons. He co-financed his company, Vignette Films, creating topics centering around African American culture. He's had a long, meticulous career working on a number of animated projects, but despite being one of the earliest black animators, Mr. Norman has never gave a second thought towards this significant fact.
Always been these horrible rumors around that he was not friendly, particularly to people of color, didn't like black people, and you hold it up against the man you know. What do you want people to know?
Well, these rumors simply will not go away. Right. But that was not the Walt Disney I knew.
Where did they come from? I don't know.
In 2016, he was made a Disney legend. While he no longer works for the company, his title of a legend makes him a senior to be listened to, and has been a supporter of getting the film republicised once again. He's even revealed that book publishers have tried to use his influence to try and license off some of the rare animals from the Disney classic. In 2017, Whoopi Goldberg was made a Disney legend, and after the ceremony, she expressed an interest of trying to start a conversation to re-show Song of the South, suggesting that if it is indeed released on DVD, that it would be most appropriate to include some bonus features to educate the surrounding controversy about the movie.
For example, you could very easily have a documentary, the making of the film Song of the South, use entertainment to really educate and show a little bit of American history.
As it's been seen with companies releasing movies and TV shows from yesteryears with questionable depictions, usually accompanied by a featurette explaining the offending content. Even Disney themselves have practiced this. But as of yet, their internal talks are still in vain.
The Disney Corporation is going to find out very soon, if they do release this film, that African Americans will be outside protesting, that bringing back up that painful reminder is a slap in the face to our ancestors.
On the 25th of May of 2020, an African American by the name of George Floyd was arrested after suspicion of carrying a fake $20 note. But while he was being obtained, George broke down into a panic attack, pleading to the officers to not get into the police vehicle as he was claustrophobic. The situation got progressively worse, where George was pinned down, where Officer Derek Chauvin was pressing his knee on George's neck. George repeatedly said over 20 times to the officer that he couldn't breathe, until he finally passed out. An ambulance arrived on the scene, but by then it was far too late. George Floyd had died. Derek Chauvin was later arrested for second-degree murder, along with the other officers at the scene. This image of a black man dying at the hands of a white officer hit too close to home for many coloured people. This started a movement that there was still a lack of equality in our society, re-sparking the embellishment of the Black Lives Matter movement, initially starting in the US, but it has now transcended across the globe. During this time, media companies have been retracting some of their content that may be seen as racially insensitive, and also have heavily re-evaluated their current productions that can feature coloured minorities. The Black Lives Matter movement has even caused an echo through the Disney parks, where after 34 years they've decided to retire the Splash Mountain ride and to re-theme it as a Princess and the Frog attraction, another Disney film that portrays African Americans in a more positive light for the general public. Even references towards the film, such as the instrumentals of Zippity Doo-Dah, have been removed from the park, which in consequence has made Song of the South even more outside of the Disney circle. The future for the film is currently bleak. The definition of racism is by discriminating or hating against a group of people upon their skin colour, culture and nationality. Confused individuals trying to seek out any aspect that could be interpreted as being racist say that they don't see anything that's immediately problematic, as the plantation workers and Uncle Remus especially is seen in a well-being manner, teaching Johnny high moral messages, and are never seen explicitly hated against, but it's its antiquarian stereotyping that holds its damaging nature. While Song of the South did not invent the imagery of a white master and black servant relationship, and nor was it alone depicting this kind of relation, but in movies between blacks and whites for its time, using Song of the South as a prime example, we see the black individuals have their life completely evolve around the white family. A young youth of African American could watch the film and wonder why the white family are privileged to have so much luxury around them compared to the black people, where the place that they reside to and the clothes they wear are in disrepair. For decades, this type of imagery in media has for multiple generations made non-whites feel as if they don't want to be seen.
Alex, your son, gonna feel when he looks up and it's a Caucasian boy up there. And I was like, I don't know. That's how, don't people want to see that? I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to see a Filipino American.
Granted, maybe not every single individual, but the impact for a lack of equal opportunity seen in movies and shows can't be ignored.
Yeah, because I grew up wanting to have blue eyes and blonde hair, and I wanted my name to be Mary, you know, because again, we were so subjected to those images and those images alone.
I changed my name a few times too. I remember putting clothespins on my nose to make my nose narrower because I was ashamed of what I looked like. It didn't fit in and it didn't belong on camera.
And while the industry have taken great steps to break the mold of diversity, it still has been a controversial ideal.
I know for Susie, one of the most important things was that she sound smart and that she's very well spoken, because there were not a lot of brown girls in cartoons. As a matter of fact, there still aren't. I love when people of color come up to me and say, you don't know what it meant to me to see myself in a cartoon. I got one little black girl that I get to see that looks like me. Thank you so much.
In an idealized world, it'd be great to think that since the early days of cinema, that society has taken great strides of everybody having an equal opportunity. But the sad truth is that there's still so many out there that feel treated unfairly in the world.
Cutting out one blackface joke in an episode and the episode remains intact, you can walk away from. You can't walk away from a death from a bullet.
It's easy to say that these people are oversensitive, but it is important to recognise that people are entitled to how they personally feel. and shrugging off the situation doesn't precisely help the people in question.
And I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this.
Did Walt Disney intentionally create a racist movie? Not likely. He so highly rated his black workers, on the same level as his white workers. Despite the rather loose attempt to meeting the consultants halfway, was he neglectful on the historical facts of the movie? Likely, but he was also neglectful on the German setting of Snow White. Very little of Italian culture is shown through Pinocchio. The genesis of where these stories came from garnered little interest from Walt Disney, just as these fairy tales have been changed and manipulated for over generations. Walt Disney saw fit to do the same. While he didn't write the script, he could have ceased the arguments that were constantly being fired up by Donald Raymond. But regardless of the facts, is it justifiable for Song of the South to be locked up? Well, that's up for the individual.